You are listening to Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. I'm your host, Josh Lucas, and at Method, our vision is to connect technology with humanity for a simpler digital future. Join us as we speak with leading experts to discuss industry trends, best practices, and emerging technology that can help you and your organization craft better digital products and experiences. This episode is from a tech talk we hosted in our Method office. We host these discussions once a month, and if you like what you hear, we would love for you to join us live either in person or virtually. You can find more details about our Tech Talk schedule at method.com. Now, let's jump in.
On my left, we have Josh Batie. So Josh is the Vice President of Automotive Vehicles at Toyota Motors North America. In that role, he is responsible for all aspects of North American Level 4 autonomous vehicles. He's also got over 20 years of experience in the automotive industry, previously Chief Product Owner for out-of-vehicle connected vehicle products and services. He's also held leadership roles at Nissan North America, Fisker, and Accenture. And the one thing that I want to highlight about Josh's background is that he is also in charge at TM&A of their Flying eVTOL program. So if you don't know what that is like the closest thing to flying cars that we have. So for those people that have dreamed about flying cars, Josh, you're working on it, right?
Yeah, I'm going to work on it. If you ever want to get out of a meeting really easily, you just say, hey, look, I'm going to go figure out how to make cars fly. I'll be back in a while. And
that gets you a free hour.
They won't look for you for at least 30 minutes.
That gets you a free hour anytime. I like that. I also want to introduce Evangelos Simoudis. Evangelos is the founder and managing director of Synapse Partners, which is a company that invests in early stage startups, developing both horizontal and vertical enterprise software AI applications. He is also an author and a keynote speaker, and he's written 3 books in and around emerging automotive technology and mobility experiences. The latest of those books is coming out now. I get to do like a Jimmy Kimmel thing here. His latest is called The Flagship Experience, How Artificial Intelligence and Software-Defined Vehicles Will Revolutionize the Automotive Customer Experience. If you're interested enough in the topics that we are talking about today to be here, you should please own and buy Evangelos' book. It's been really helpful to sort of help us think about how we frame issues around this. I'd actually like to start by asking you a question, Evangelos, if that's okay. I want to level set on terms for a little bit. We don't get to talk about cars enough here in Charlotte. But one of the key theses of your new book is about the pivotal role that software-defined vehicles are going to play in the future of the automotive industry. And I'm hoping that you could just sort of characterize what that means for a vehicle to be software-defined and how that has changed over the last couple of years.
So first of all, pleasure to be here. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for coming. So software-defined vehicle is actually a term that, even though it's relatively new, it's already been mishandled. So I will try to give my definition that I use in the book, which is vehicles whose capabilities, whose functionality is virtualized and is managed by software that is running on high-performance computers, as opposed to the vehicles that we have today, whose functionality is really managed by specialized hardware, each of which has its own software, mostly called firmware. Now, if you were to think about why do we care about software-defined vehicles, is that maybe from both the customer and the automaker perspective, their biggest capability is that they're able to update their functionality over the air. And the first one that we saw having that capability are the Tesla vehicles, but now several others do. But they do more than that. I mean, their intelligence comes from the fact that they provide increased levels of driving automation. So we have now vehicles that can go up to level 3. I'm talking about the broadly available vehicles. And then obviously you've heard about robo-taxis and long-haul trucks. They're able to interact with the transportation infrastructure. And again, because they're big data generators and they have a lot of sensors around them. And they typically incorporate software that allows them to do intelligent management of their new powertrains. Most of these vehicles tend to be battery electric, Today, we're also looking at hydrogen fueled vehicles. From the automaker's perspective, why are automakers very interested in that? In addition to having that over-the-air update capability, which means that saves them money, saves them time to correct problems. The data that these vehicles collect have very positive impact on designing, manufacturing, selling, and servicing the vehicle. They save money, and then they allow them, and this is one of the main thesis of the book, is that they allow them to come closer to the customer, to better understand the customer if they want to do that.
Yeah. And I definitely want to get back to the data piece behind that, because I think that's a critical piece. Josh, I want to ask a question for you and bring in some of your expertise. In your role, you're really a leading voice for how OEMs are approaching the practical challenge of integrating deeper driver automation into production vehicles and actually getting them out into the wild. I think there's a million like regulatory and safety and technology questions that we've got to answer there, but I'm really interested to get your take on the customer perspective. And what is the thing do you think that Toyota wants to solve for customers and is able to solve for customers in the automated space? And how do you see that changing over the last couple of years?
Again, thank you all for having me. This is, I've been looking forward to this. We've had a handful of calls going in, and I figured we were going to get some fun questions like this, but Toyota kind of comes out and says it right up front. It's mobility for all. Yep. They want, and I could ask, I don't know, there's 100, 150 people in the room, maybe. I could ask every one of you what mobility is and write it down, and we would have 100 different answers. And so we try to simplify it down to the most common denominator, which is how do we get people from A to B? How do we help move people, goods, or services from A to B? And that's at any level, any geography, any way, shape, or form. So when you back that out and you look at, okay, how do we start to transition into some of these new technologies? We really had to take a step back and say, what's going to be the driving factor? Mm-hmm. And there's been shifting paradigms. The Uber paradigm, where that thesis is that Uber's going to need hundreds of thousands of these robo-taxis out there immediately, and they're going to take over the personally owned vehicle and no one will have a car.
And they're going to operate.
Yeah, and they're going to operate them all.
Yeah.
And that has now shifted. I will say this, if any of you get a chance to fly into Phoenix, open up your Uber app and have the moment I had, because I am the guy that loves my cars, almost laughed at this role because I said, I'll never give up my driving to a car or computer. And I went and I flew into Phoenix and I took a Waymo, and it's on the Uber app. It's fully autonomous. You get in the back seat. I hope I don't. You have that oh shit moment where you're like, nobody's driving this thing, and you head off down towards Tempe and it's driving itself. And It's incredibly smooth. It feels safer than being in the back seat of my car with my 15-year-old driving it. And you recognize like, wow, this is a game changer. And then you go do some rough math and you're like, wait a second. So you're telling me if I lived in Orange County and I worked, say, in LA, and I drove an hour and a half there and an hour and a half back every day, and I could get in my car, plug in an address, open up my laptop, turn on my phone, watch my Netflix, I could have an hour and a half back each way, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. If you do the math on that, that's a month of your life back.
Yeah.
And so for me, this paradigm shifted away from, okay, yeah, robotaxi will be one of those stepping stones, but giving customers the time back of their lives to be able to say, look, this is something you would really want in a personally owned vehicle.
Yeah.
You see Tesla charging $12,000 for a level 2 today. How much is somebody willing to pay to have a month back of every year? So
that's a pretty compelling.
Yeah, it starts to become a whole new sequence of what's that experience like? And then the ripple effect of that is huge, because then you say, okay, well now Orange County and Riverside and all these, you almost change the dynamics of how you go to work, how you operate, how you function in life. So you just start to have that moment. And that moment for me happened when I went to Phoenix. So I encourage all of you, if you get a chance to go see one of these, I think Waymo's best of breed right now. You'll have that. I hope you have that same moment I did, where it's like, oh, I'm willing to pay for this.
Yeah.
Or San Francisco.
Oh, it's yeah.
So I guess, how does Toyota specifically think about that, right? So I've got a handful of Waymos operating mostly on the West Coast. A global car maker like Toyota, obviously you guys have a different equation because you're trying to think about how to make it work at scale. I mean, what is Toyota's approach to it? And maybe like, how has that evolved over since you've been learning about it?
So Toyota has taken two paths and one's divided into a third. So the first thing is we said, okay, we want to develop our own technology in-house.
Okay.
We have a company called Woven Planet. They're a sister company of ours that they're focused on bringing that technology in-house. But the second thing we did is we said, look, we recognize that this is a burgeoning technology. It's growing every day. So we made strategic bets, companies like Uber ATG and May Mobility and others. And we made bets along the way saying, okay, we're going to bet on some of these third-party AV companies. And then the next piece is when do those two come back to merge, right? Sure. When does a AV company become a tier one provider like a Denso, or when do they become that part that you're just as used to as your spoiler on your car?
Yeah.
That's the next piece of this, is when do the two pieces merge back together? And that's what we're working through now.
Yep.
I should also say that Woven acquired one of our companies, one of our portfolio companies called Renovo, it's part of that plan to develop both the software for that software-defined vehicle, but also the automation that goes on top of that.
Yeah. So a question for Evangelos, and I would love to get, Josh, your thoughts on this too. So Method's a digital product company. So we get really excited about the prospect of software-driven automotive experiences. It really whets the appetite. And the idea that your car can be as infinitely configurable and personalizable and updatable as your mobile device. So essentially the analogy of cars as mobile devices on wheels. And one thing that you guys have both reminded me of over the last couple of weeks is sort of the realities of the environment in which automobiles get built and used, right? You've got sort of the physical, regulatory, environmental constraints. Like I think you had even shared with us before, Evangelos, like if I drop my phone, nobody dies, but the stakes are much higher in the automotive world. And so I'm interested to get your thoughts and your thoughts too on like the tension between the agile development cycle of a digital product and the 5 to 7 year development cycle of a car. And how do you reconcile those things?
In order to get to, let's take even the vision of the robotaxi and extend it as the function-specific autonomous vehicle, autonomous long-haul truck, autonomous VTOL, pick up your type of vehicle so that you can go from point A to point B, okay? In fact, I will say that in my second book, I start with this example where I get up in the morning and I have an app that tells me, today, I live in San Francisco area, 101 is very crowded. We know you have a meeting in San Francisco. Don't drive. We'll send an Uber to pick, or a robotaxi to pick you up, and blah, 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 right? So that takes a while. And then you come to reality and you come to realize, how many things have to change in the process.
Right.
One of the biggest obstacles that we have found as a firm in this advisory work that we have been doing with automakers, tier one suppliers, is that the industry for the past 70 years has created these routines that call for very siloed development. So there is the engineering department and there's a manufacturing department. The example of throwing things over the wall to the next one until the car comes out of the assembly line and then it has to be supported in some way is not far-fetched. So now from that, you have to move to, and Tesla forced everybody, to be fair, to think about how do you develop a new vehicle that has not this firmware. We were talking earlier, what is the difference between a conventional vehicle and a software-defined vehicle? Ultimately configurable. I'll say that if we can get to the 30% configurable vehicle, we would have made a huge stride.
Sure.
Because the industry is making changes. I think organizations such as Woven Planet are an example of these transformations that the industry is making, and other automakers have similar type of organizations. The biggest impedance mismatch that exists today is when these organizations start interfacing with the existing infrastructure, like the existing plant. So now you have, like in the case of Toyota, you have this ARINE software that's going to be the basis for the software-defined vehicle. Now this has to go to be incorporated in body, right? That has a chassis, So that's where it has changed, because now, coming to your question after a very long segue, which is not unreasonable for a Greek, is that the life cycles need to change. Today, in the automotive industry, you have a 7-year major update, and every 3.5 years, a minor update for the vehicle.
Sure.
There is no reason for the chassis to be there for 15 years. I mean, you have a skateboard, right? You have the battery. But the application software that is going to make this configurable vehicle, and you can say, okay, now I want to do a range extension, or I want to have rear wheel steering. I want to incorporate rear wheel steering in my vehicle through an application. That should be changing every 18 months. So now we're coming to essentially a layer cake of life cycles, right? You have a different life cycle for the chassis, different life cycle for the hardware, and that is the vision for the software-defined vehicles, which requires cultural change, organizational change, in addition to the technology change.
Yeah, I like that metaphor of sort of like the layer cakes of different horizons that you have to plan for. I mean, how do you guys think about that tension where you're going to have a skateboard that's got to last 15 years and support millions of vehicles, and then on top of that, you have to have ever-increasing levels of flexibility and adaptability?
You said it a lot more eloquently than I did, but here's how I do it. I'd have to look. I think this is an iPhone 15. Pretty sure.
Thank you.
Might be a 14, might be a 15. I can't remember, honestly. But anyways, if I said today, I'm going to have my car driven off my iPhone 15. Okay, that's great. But fast forward, I'm making decisions on cars today for 2027 and 28. So you're saying, all right, take my iPhone 15, I'm going to put it out there at 27, 28. And this is where the software-defined vehicle part of it I struggle with, is that, all right, so now I'm at 28, I'm using my iPhone 15. So think back 5 years, you were probably on an iPhone 8 at that point. So yeah, that's how far behind you are now. Now fast forward a whole nother 10 years through the life cycle of that car. I'm still sitting on my iPhone 15, 17 years from now.
Yeah.
Think 17 years ago, you didn't even have an iPhone. Does that start to get you there? So in my mind, it's all, you nailed it. It's making these strategic hardware bets on the car, because now instead of a chief engineer saying, I want to make the car that is driving the best margin for my company. Well, it may not be the margin today. It's the margin you want 10 years from now by the services you're going to render 10 years from now.
And this is
so you have to bet on bigger technology.
Yeah, beautiful point, because like in many industries, the automotive industry over the past 70 years has been going through sustaining innovation. So they've been making incremental improvements on essentially the same platform, the internal combustion engine and everything that the regulation puts on it or style puts on it. Now you have to start thinking about it as disruptive innovation. In disruptive innovation, you don't need to think only about technology. You need to think about business model and technology and culture at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, you're not starting from a clean sheet, right? You're not Tesla or Rivian or NIO or whoever. You still have a business model that you're flying with, right? So literally, you have the 747 and you say, okay, now I'm going to build a Concorde while I'm flying the 747. Yep. And so now you're saying, okay, boy, I have to change the wings. Well, will the plane continue flying as I'm changing the wings, or am I going to crash? That is the dilemma that the incumbent automotive industry is dealing with. Yeah. So one more quick point, if I could. The reason I said earlier that today the definition of software-defined vehicle is a bit muddled is because the incumbent automotive industry has to transition to the clean definition. And how are they? So the clean definition is when we start having the so-called zonal architectures and central computer architectures, very much like we have in a data center. We're not there yet. So if you look at vehicles today, including, by the way, vehicles by newcomers, they are what I call domain-based architecture. So what they do is they start consolidating these components that I mentioned before, trying to get to that, how much personalization, how much updating can I do to the vehicle while keeping my costs at the so that I can at least maintain my margins.
Yeah. You shared an example last night when we were at dinner that I've been thinking about since, which is the vertical integration of Tesla and how they are taking sort of a systems thinking approach so that they're not only thinking about the vehicle itself, but the way that it's being charged. So that when I back up to a supercharger, the location of the charging port is aligned with the location of the supercharger port. I just back in and go. Whereas now Ford might be using that same supercharger and they've made the decision to put it in the front right because the engineers it says that's the best way to do it. But from an environment standpoint, from an ecosystem standpoint, it might not be the right thing to do. So you have to get better at a completely different set of things. Right.
Which is what Josh was saying, where you have to think ahead.
Yeah.
And you have to think of, Tesla, in my opinion, and this really is one of the first points that I make in the new book, is the first company that put to practice that the customer experience doesn't stop within the cabin of the vehicle. It actually goes outside the vehicle. And from the mobile app to the charging network, to the batteries that you put in your home, to the tiles that you put on your roof as in lieu of solar panels, everything has been thought of in an integrated way, which is something that the incumbent automakers were not used to having. Think of GM doesn't own any gas stations, right? So it's a very different thinking. Even the way that they designed from a customer experience perspective, having benefit to both OEM and customer, the supercharger is an interesting design because it's a very dumb device, which means easy to maintain, but it collects a lot of data which ships up, as opposed to the chargers from other charging networks, which have a much more complex architecture by need because they need to serve many different brands.
Sure.
And they break more frequently. They don't collect the right data all the time. So anyway,
I want to talk a little bit about the retail model because one of the things that we weren't able to share in your bio is you actually came up in more of a dealership mindset, right?
I did. Yeah.
You ran a bunch of Nissan dealerships in the Northwest, and I think your parents were in the business.
I grew up. My parents owned car dealerships, so my Saturday mornings were my dad would take me. You guys probably some of you might remember this, the old school guys that were smoking out front. He would start me there and then they would take me inside to the guys at the sales tower, which were the ones like up in that scary, like prison block looking thing that looked down on the whole. Yeah, that's where I learned really I am a darn good liar's poker player.
Okay.
And I could probably tell your FICO score within maybe 100 or so points, but yes, I grew up in the industry. And it's been pretty cool because I will say this, my family was old school car dealers.
Yeah.
And now I've gone all the way to this other end of the spectrum, which is, what will that next retail model look like?
Yeah. So I think you have this really unique perspective. You're working on some pretty far out strategic stuff, but at the end of the day, you know what it takes to move metal, right? And to get stuff off the lot. And one of the things that I reflect back on is we have been talking about the death of the current dealer retail model for a long time, 10, 15, 20 years, and it seems to be very resilient. We are seeing some maybe weak signals, a lot of dealer consolidation. I think there's some direct consumer models out there, especially for folks that don't have that sort of dealership debt. So I wanted to get your thoughts on whether or not you feel like this culmination of all the different technologies coming together and then also changing customer expectations and what we're learning is in terms of consumer behavior from other, are those things finally going to combine to a reckoning for how cars are sold?
I really don't think so. And I'll give you one example. We spent 10 years of my career trying to get dealers to sell vehicles online and deliver them to customer homes.
Mhm.
And they learned how to do it in 4 months. Between March of 2020 and June of 2020, they figured it out.
Yeah.
And they haven't stopped yet.
Yeah.
So
Necessity is the mother of
they
invention, I
can
think.
do it when pressed against it. Now, the other piece I'll say is they are going to have to evolve, and so are we. I'll say this. Toyota made mistakes around our mobile app and introducing our next multimedia because we thought we could create an Apple-like experience where you just turned on your phone and you knew how to work it. Well, going back to your comments about the application and the chargers being an extension of the car, it wasn't that way. And there's also all these new services and features that go along with that we're going to have to help our dealers be ready to be that level of service that our customers are going to expect, but in just a totally different genre. So yes, I think they survive. Yes, I think they evolve. And honestly, it's a chance for them to maybe even excel in the field because they're going to have to give up some of what, today they're about parts and service. Tomorrow, they're going to be about how does that car fit to you? How is it personalized to you? And how do I serve you and help you get to that?
Yeah. What do you think?
So if you think about what happened in 20 was a compelling event, obviously, but it showed them that there's going to be a value exchange. There's going to be value that they provide to the customer, but there's value coming back to them. And one of the problems that I'm seeing, and again, for the work that we do and even the research that I did for this particular book, I interviewed a lot of different constituencies on this. The dealers don't yet see this value exchange for offering services, for offering, around these new vehicles. So you see the resistance that they've shown when Ford came out and said, if you want to sell our electric vehicles, you need to make this kind of investment, you need to install this kind of equipment, and everybody threw up, right? The reason is because I said, well, yes, you're asking me to make this multi-million-dollar investment. Where is the value for me? Another example along these lines is what happened with Tesla and Hertz. Hertz orders 60,000 Teslas or some very large number. They distribute them to their major locations, and they don't think to put people in those locations that can train the customers on how to use these new vehicles.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll give you a very simple example. My wife is a Lexus through and through. There's no other automaker in the world other than Lexus. So she's looking for an electric vehicle. She goes to Tesla. She goes to Lexus. She says, Lexus. I said, why? He said, well, because it drives like a regular car. It has the right pedals. My learning curve is not going to be too steep. I can tell you that this mistake between Hertz and Tesla was a $10 million mistake. 10 million in terms of the investment that I needed to make. What it cost them is cost the CEO, Hertz's CEO, his job. Okay. It costs, it's going to have a huge financial impact on Hertz's stock. Okay. And it's a black eye for Tesla. They have now all of these vehicles they have to put back into the market as used vehicles. They have to bring prices down, blah. It's a stupid mistake.
But you don't think the lesson to be learned from that is to avoid the rental model? Because that could be a pretty powerful education device,
the point is that they missed a huge opportunity. Again, customer experience. They missed a huge opportunity to put a few people, maybe even in the major airports, Los Angeles, Orlando, Chicago, JFK, whatever, Dallas, who can say, yes, you want to rent a Model 3? Great. Let us show you. Do you know how to get in the vehicle? You don't have a key in the Tesla. Do you know how to charge the freaking vehicle? No, let us show you, right?
Yeah.
10 minutes, one tutorial, off you go.
Yeah. How does a Lexus dealer think about that?
I just want to tag on the back of that. It was a double down effect. I'll come back to the Lexus dealer piece of it. Hertz then set up a program with Uber that said, hey, if you go use our Teslas, we'll give you a weekly rate. And it happened again. So now you have Uber drivers that would have checked out those cars and now do a multiple of how many people sit in the back for a day that get exposed to a Tesla. And so that ball just kept rolling downhill. Now it comes back to the same point, which is We have learned now that the days of horsepower, of sheet metal, driving the sale and the next sale of vehicles is over. 60% of our Toyota and Lexus customers are customers that bought a car from us before. And
60, wow.
60. And we know that those are the most valuable customers. And the only way you have those valuable customers is you continue to support them throughout the life cycle of their vehicle. I like to think of it as a big infinity loop. And the left-hand side is you buying, but the right-hand side is you owning. And it needs to be equal on both sides and lead you back to that front side. The piece that's missing there is we pride ourselves at Toyota and Lexus on being a partner with the dealer and making sure they have everything they need to be successful. And you nailed it. It was a miss, right? I'm going to put these cars with this company and it'll all just work. We've learned it the hard way on a few other lessons as well. But we know that in order for our dealers to be successful, we have to put not just the right car in front of them, but the right information, the right skill sets, the right training, and the right incentives to move towards that. We've even gone as far as now, instead of, people don't like subscriptions. We all got subscription doubt over COVID. Well, we've gone now and said, okay, for our connected services, you can just put them on the car. They're permanently there. They go with the car.
Oh, interesting.
So get ourselves away from that model of, hey, I'm going to charge you $12 every month. So now they just become part of the feature of the car. But that means our sales consultants have to understand the value of that, have to explain it, have to set it up, have to make it have a benefit, right?
Yeah.
So that's that next mile, but because it's part of the car, they're now part of the equation of how to help it.
Interesting challenge.
Transacted.
But here's also another challenge for the automakers, okay? So we did a couple of surveys about what are the business models, because remember what I said before, one of the disruptions is happening at the business model level, not only the technology level. So if you look at what's happening in the European Union, what's happening in China versus what's happening in the US for this type of features, these kind of services, different approaches. China wants to pay, well, they want subscription, but they don't want an annual subscription. They want the pay as you go. So if I want after 3 months to get rid of this, I need to have the right to be able to do that. Europe prefers annual subscriptions. The US prefers everything upfront. Again, going back to this thinking about mobility as opposed to thinking about owning a vehicle, right? Mobility will develop regionally. It will not develop. We can no longer, which is unfortunate, right? Because again, the current model is I have an assembly line that churns out 500,000 vehicles a year, right? And the same vehicle, I can sell it in the US, and I can also sell it in Europe. When you think about mobility as opposed to automotive, it's going to develop regionally. You'll have a model for Asia, you'll have a model for Europe, you'll have a model in the US, down to the point where you may have a model for the Western US and a different model for the Midwest.
We kind of have to do that today, right? You have to build California cars.
Well, EPA is a perfect example of it.
Yeah.
You have California emissions, and now you're about to have it for data.
But you need to bring it down to the manufacturing side. I mean, you can no longer saying I'm going to churn out 500,000 vehicles and I'm just going to tweak something. You may say, okay, for California, okay, think of Bay Area and Los Angeles, just these two areas. The percent of Tesla ownership for electric vehicles, 40%, by the way, higher than China. Okay. Now, very interesting. LA is a car crazed place. Yet they're very happy to be driving the same, car that looks exactly the same like everybody else's. Okay, so what distinguishes is not the shape of the vehicle, right? It's Model Y or Model. It's really what are the capabilities of the vehicle. And if you look at the Model S, which is already a 10-year-old vehicle, the Model S of 2010 is very different from the Model S today. Same shape, by the way. But different sensors, different software. Doesn't always work, but that's software. So understanding, I mean, as part of talking about this disruption, right, and the changes that the industry needs to make, comprehending that you have to start thinking regionally, down to the nuts and bolts, not only, okay, we're going to sell so many cars in Europe, or it's a big transition for an industry that is measuring itself in cars out the assembly line.
It's hard enough if you look at any vehicle to just change what you see on the screens. When you start to tie in the body and the safety and the powertrain systems and make improvements to those, and ultimately an autonomy stack that'll sit on the vehicle, that becomes extremely challenging. So to your point about 30%, I'm with you. You quickly recognize it's going to take baby steps, but the vision is the right vision.
By the way, we were talking to one of the big three here in the US about the 70% vehicle, and they barfed all over it. They cannot think of, I'm going to be producing the same vehicle, same shape, and then I'm going to give 30% capability to change through software. So it's culture is, it will take time. It is not like the software industry, certainly not like the mobile phone industry.
You make a distinction about two types of customer experience that are going to evolve in the future. And I want to get your thoughts on this, and I want to get your thoughts on this. You have the owner journey, which is sort of what we all know today, which is I shop for the car, I go to the dealership, I buy the car, I use the car, and then I sell it. The experience that owner has. But then you also have the experience of the vehicle. And that vehicle experience is probably going to outlast the experience of the owner. You're going to have one vehicle, multiple owners, and like how you can anticipate that experience and have both the OEMs and the dealers extract value out of that experience. Talk about that.
I talk about the customer journey and the vehicle journey.
Yep.
And the customer journey is not what we traditionally think of the phases of acquiring a vehicle, but really it's the relationship that the individual has as long as they stay committed to the brand. So my wife's journey is 15 years with Tesla. Mm-hmm. I mean, with Lexus. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Okay.
It is not the most recent. Now, what is happening today, and people could disagree with it, but what I feel is happening today is that the OEM and the dealer have become particularly good in the pre-sales part of the journey. Mm-hmm. And once the vehicle is sold, there is a big gap in that journey. And a lot of things are happening. I mean, if you look at it, so in the book, I have this graphic in terms of how our digital life, which goes on, is connected with our automotive journey, right? And in the pre-sales, there's a very strong connection. In the post-sale, that connection loosens up until you're ready to buy another vehicle. Now, the dealer has it a little better because you go service the vehicle. So the dealer gets to see you, especially if you continue that relationship post the warranty period, which my wife does. But it doesn't pick up again. And that needs to change. And the software-defined vehicle, because of all the data it emits, because of all the abilities that it has to have this continuous relationship, enables the OEM and the ecosystem to have that transcends vehicles, right? As long as you're with the overall brand, because if I am, I may start with a Toyota and then move to a Lexus, right? But it's still the Toyota that the journey is still with Toyota. The other point, though, that the software-defined vehicles allow is that now the OEM, as long as they have ownership of the vehicle or control of the vehicle, they can monetize it more than once, which is today is not the case. Today, the OEM monetizes once when they ship it to the dealer. The dealer may be able to monetize it more than once, assuming that the customer uses the same dealer. But that repeated monetization doesn't exist. And again, the software-defined vehicle allows the OEMs, should they choose to take that, but it certainly allows the OEM to remonetize the vehicle And there are a lot of opportunities like to reconfigure the vehicle between owners so that you can make it most applicable to or appropriate to the needs of the market at the time that you're making it available again.
Yeah. So you have a vehicle experience that transcends owner, and then you have a customer experience that transcends any vehicle. I mean, how do you guys think about those two?
I'll kind of, you hit on it's the data. We have several projects going on in-house right now. One of them we call Carfax Killer, because Carfax is typically driven by input, right? Body shop input, insurance company input, etc. We know when a car's had what we call love taps, 4 miles per hour or less. We can tell you where and when it happened. So we know the health, how that car was driven. We know those things.
Wait, how do you know that? I'm concerned.
Trust me. The all-seeing eye knows, and it won't tell you where. And please don't sign any documents or anything on the ballot box this fall about data privacy.
Okay.
We just don't want any of that.
Okay.
No, but
Good to know.
it actually should be, and this is it. I'm guarantee I'm leading you into your next set of questions. But the data privacy piece is real. At the same time, how do we use that vehicle information, the data coming off that car, to help customers make good decisions? If you see a car's life as 1 through 3, year 1 through 3 being the first life, 3 through 6, second life, 6 through 9, third life, 6 through 9 is a perfect ride-hail car. The residual curve is very shallow. The dollars per mile that vehicle is decreasing every time it's used is very, very small. First 3 years, it's dropping at about 20, 25 cents a mile.
Especially for electrics.
Yeah. Lexus, though, are much better.
Especially for electrics.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I got you. Anyways, where I'm going with this is that we're working with our dealers now to say, you take it from the vehicle aspect. I know you've driven, I know your wife drove that Lexus very well. She's at her 3-year mark. I want to call you and tell you, hey, great news. I have a new one for you. I'd like to take that Lexus, sell it to you, who you seem to be very in tune to having a second life vehicle. And then maybe that vehicle, when you're done with it, becomes the Uber driver's vehicle that is a perfect. And if Toyota can keep that vehicle in our family throughout that life, we have opportunities, financing opportunities, servicing opportunities. It's one vehicle owned by many, experienced in different ways by many. But we've started mapping it to that curve. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's where AI, by the way, plays a big role. I mean,
Say more about that.
we have developed algorithms to analyze the data that Josh's talking about to be able to say, here's how you need to reconfigure. And by the way, at a different scale, this model is what the airlines use. I mean, if you think about the relationship between airplane leasing companies and airlines own about 10% of their fleet. Everything else is leased. When Emirates gets a new A350 and uses it for 3 years or 5, whatever they use it, then they may go to Ethiopian Airlines or whatever. But this is happening today, and who you're going to sell it to or lease it to that second time around and third time around, until eventually ends up with FedEx, for cargo, right? It really depends on the understanding of the market and the understanding of the actual plane, right? And we have all the data to be able to do the same thing with vehicles.
Yeah, and it plays to the fact too of, let's just say for fun, you had 2 side-by-side vehicles. They look identical, but the fact that we know how they've been used allows us to react differently to them.
Sure.
Maybe his wife is a very good driver and you've hit a lot of curbs and you're really hard on the accelerator and kill the brakes every day.
Yeah.
We can tell the difference in those 2 cars, and we're going to want that car. We're going to want to call you and say, hey, look, why don't you stay in that car and I'll lower the price. I'll keep you in our family, but at the same time, I'll extend it so that bad car doesn't end up coming through our system in the wrong way. There's so many of these pieces of control. And by doing that, you think, oh, it's a tiny microcosm. But if you do that over and over again, now you control the lease payments for everybody. And that becomes the residual curve.
And by the way, on the data point, I mean, we need to address this elephant in the room. Okay?
I knew that. I was setting him up for that.
Yeah.
I figured he'd go there next.
But the fact is that as long as people understand they see value, they will give permission. We've seen it on the internet for the past 20 years. Okay. The point is, and it's not for everyone, right? Not every driver will give you permission to use their data. Okay. We're seeing it in Europe, by the way, so we don't have to imagine too much. But as long as the automaker comes, or the member of that mobility ecosystem provides or shows what the value is, it's going to be, because, and I'll give you an example. Today, Uber is our mobility partner because they can transport me, they can bring stuff to me if I don't want to go to wherever the stuff is. They know every time I travel, they know what I do in the city. They know when they can infer when I use my vehicle versus when I use one of their vehicles. And most people don't think about it. It's convenience, it's safety, and they have put they learn in the process. They didn't get it right from the get-go. They had some black ice in the process, but now they have become a mobility partner, and their financial performance shows that. Financial performance post-pandemic, by the way. The automaker, like Toyota, that want to become that mobility partner, they will need to find ways to see that, to show that value.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right.
Transparency. I mean, that to me is, it's your car, it's your data. And as long as we're transparent with what we do with it and you have a say in what we do with it, that's the fair trade-off, in my opinion, because we were talking before we went on, and I've realized in the last couple of years, I'm getting old, and there's a generational gap, right? If you were to ask my parents, would they sign up to have their vehicle data seen by the all-seeing eye over their dead body? Something must have happened in their generation where they will not sign up to give their data to anybody.
Sure.
But if you were to ask my 15-year-old, I don't even think she knows what a data consent is. She just clicks the OK button every time. Like, she doesn't care. And so there's this whole, as long as you're transparent and you allow that person to make the decision on how you're using their data on your behalf, that to me is the trade-off.
Sure.
It has to be that two-way street. It cannot be that feeling of I'm taking it all and I'm not telling you what I'm doing with it.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Well said. I'm seeing that we're up maybe 10 minutes left. If you guys are willing to take a couple questions from the audience and then folks online, I'd love to open it up for a few minutes.
A great talk today. We talk about mobility, and you guys have talked about vehicles. What kind of work is being done in the interaction of the vehicle and the driving environment? So things like smart intersections, smart roads, intercommunication between vehicles, it's all got to roll up at some point. What kind of work is being done there?
It depends what region of the world you're talking about. So if you look at Singapore, for example, there is a lot of communication between vehicle and transportation infrastructure. Some of it is driven by economics. Some of it is driven by control. And the so-called V2X work and there are some standards that are emerging and evolving in that area. We will see increasing interaction between vehicle and road. And frankly, we need to do that. When we were doing a lot of work in autonomous vehicles, and if you look at the autonomous vehicles of today, whether it is May Mobility, which is low speed autonomy, or Waymo, which is speed of traffic autonomy, all of the intelligence is on the vehicle. A Waymo vehicle costs $180,000 on top of the vehicle's price. Okay. And that $180,000 goes for the sensors and the integration and obviously the software. We cannot continue that if we want autonomy to be broadly available. The intelligence needs to be distributed between transportation infrastructure, which means roads, which means buildings, and the vehicle so that the price can come down. So there are some places that are starting to approach this. Dubai is another one, by the way. And I think what we will see as a result of this is what I've been calling mobility orchestrators. You will be able to see cities, first with cities and then maybe broader areas, which are acting as in the same way that the air traffic control system acts. They can predict congestion. They can say, cannot go this way, you have to go that way, whether you like it or not. And with autonomous vehicles, this will become more possible to do it.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. I was going to use the flying aviation one as our example. Right now, one of the companies we're closely partnered with is going for what's called type certification, which any aircraft has to have to be able to fly legally, based on certain requirements of where it would go, how it would fly, how fast it would go. Well, that's different country by country. And you can only imagine when you call the FAA and say, hey, I've got this great idea. I want to put an electric flying vehicle in the air that has no one driving it, and just see how our government agency reacts to that. It kind of gives you the depth and breadth of drop it down to May Mobility. May Mobility is operating in Sun City, Arizona, driver out microbuses. So anybody that knows Sun City, I think it's 70 years and older community, and it's got over 70% utilization. So these are golf cart communities, and they're willing to use it, and there's nobody driving the car. And so, but it took so much to get just that city to see it that way. Now we're replicating it in Ann Arbor, who sees it a little bit differently, and you replicate it in Austin and in you see where I'm going with this is it's going to be baby steps till we can get to VTX. But I agree with you. That is the part that leaps forward. Volume gets the LiDAR sensors down, but V2X gets some of the compute off the car, which would make it huge.
I almost view the problem a different way. There's almost too many people that are contributing to this. And this idea of standardization, like I'm terrified of the idea of the Buick down the road operating on a different frequency as my Lexus coming the other way, right? I mean, there's got to be some efforts to like, how do we standardize that as a communication platform that everybody can agree with, right?
There's some startups coming online. A couple of ex-Toyota guys have gone out and created a startup that's trying to do exactly that, where we can say, all right, we know our telematics data, but now pool it with Fords and Chevys. And now you can say, okay, if you're stranded with your Chevy on that side of the road, I will get a notification in my Toyota head unit that a Chevy's, or vice versa. So that's got to happen.
Interesting challenge.
Yeah. So the challenge is there, and it's time.
Okay. First of all, thanks for all the insight that you're providing today. I'm seeing a lot of parallels, what you've described to me here, to monolithic software development that used to happen in the 80s and 90s. And when open source came along, everybody would poo-poo on it, said, you can never buy this stuff. Many people could never produce things as good as we can in a silo here. I don't want to mention any names, but let's say Schmort as a company. But when you look at the automotive industry today and the potential of software developed vehicles, could you envision a time where those platforms, where there's hardware, software, are open source, created by the community, and then combined in new ways when, for example, the car is resold? I don't have to have necessarily the Ford operating system. Now that I buy a car, I can buy the Toyota operating system, and that's the value add.
Are you going down the Fast and Furious lane? Is that where you're heading on this one? Or we've had discussions about that, because I'll use the Fast and Furious example, actually. You probably all have had a vehicle a time or two where it's got sport mode and eco mode and these different modes, right? Well, what if we were able to give you that ability to tune your car exactly how you wanted it? The risk it puts the OEM at is massive, right? Because you could tune that car to the point it is the Fast and Furious car. And so there's these limitations that we have to extract from it and say, okay, within the realm of reality, what can you customize? Because I'm the same guy that wants to see it. Open the books and let me program this the way I want it to be programmed.
So we are already there in certain aspects of the automotive experience. And the best example is Android, open source Android for the vehicle. This is different from Android Automotive and different from Android Auto. I know Google is completely stupid in terms of coming up with name differentiated. Anyway, so today, most OEMs have gotten open source Android and put it in their infotainment systems of their vehicles. The problem now is that when Google says, you know what, we're going to stop supporting version 10, whatever it is, the OEM has to support that for 10 years. That's the regulation, right? So the big problems that OEMs will start having with open source software is that of continuing to support. I mean, this is where, again, going back to the smartphone example, software-defined vehicle is not like a smartphone. There's different regulatory requirements that will never make it. I mean, because if Google says, you know what, I'm going to stop supporting this, you go down to Verizon or T-Mobile or whoever is your carrier, you get a new phone. Okay. Well, it's a little bit more expensive to go down to your, Lexus dealer and get a new Lexus.
Sure.
So this is something that will need to be resolved. And again, as we're thinking about software-defined vehicles, regardless of what level of driving automation they have, we will have to resolve some of these issues because open source will be used increasingly. I mean, there are many virtues to open source software. It's just that it's very different from thinking about open source for your CRM application versus open source for your...
It's a little bit more like the walled garden of an iOS versus your Android. Like that's the internal argument that's going on, is how much has to be a walled garden and how much can we let you play with it?
You will be able to go change sensors, for example, upgrade your sensors without having to. This is what I was talking about, the life cycles being different.
And one more question, because I know, Randall,
you talk about the software defined in looking at kind of the future models. Somewhat you talked about subscriptions. You think about the 15-year-old daughter. Is there something that is at the future of you pay for a subscription? I have a junior driver, we'll say, but after a while, that person has moved on, has their own car. I may want to take some restrictions off that I pay for that. Well, I look at the car industry as very transactional. I buy a car. Yes, you continue a relationship, but will they get into a software as a service type scenario, subscriptions for more features?
That's absolutely the hope. It's just interesting though. We've had conversations with SXM begging them, let us just put SXM on for the life of the car. Like, no, it has to be a subscription. I'm going, please guys, please. I'm trying to help you, help me, help you. And so you see these moments, but I completely agree with you that this day has to come on the ability to take and add and remove things from the vehicle. And there's pieces like that have to happen.
I think if you were, depending on what horizon you want to look forward to, but let's say 15 years from now, 20 years from now, there will be parts in the world that you will be buying a subscription to mobility, not a subscription to a car. Because you can buy a subscription to a car today. Volvo has it, Cadillac has it, Porsche has it, right?
I'm buying a different thing.
You will say, yeah, I'm buying a subscription for 10,000 miles a year. That's it. It doesn't matter how I move. If I want to go back and forth to LA and I want somebody to be driving me, that will be priced.
User-based insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's a perfect one.
Exactly.
Please help me thank Josh and Evangelos.
Thank you for joining us on Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. If you would like to know more about how Method can partner with you and your organization, you can find more information at method.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social and be sure to check out our monthly Tech Talks. You can find those on our website. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next time.